I'm sure it's no secret that I'm a big fan of Fire Emblem. Ever since I played Awakening back in 2019, I've been hooked on the series. Of course, there are some games I'm not super fond of like Fate's Conquest or Echoes, but overall, Fire Emblem is a really fun and entertaining series of games. So, when Fire Emblem Engage was revealed, I was of course excited to play it. I thought bringing back older Fire Emblem characters was cool, and the whole Engage mechanic looked super fun to me. Most of the time, whenever a new game is about to release, I honestly kind of forget about it until after it launches, but I wanted to make sure I played Engage as soon as it came out. I remember waiting all day for school to end just so I could play the game. I never pre-ordered it or bought it digitally. I wanted a physical copy, so while most of my friends were playing it, I had to wait. But the second that final bell rang, I got in my car as soon as possible and drove to GameStop just to pick up a copy of Engage. I was also able to get my hands on a female Corrin amiibo, since Nintendo re-released some Fire Emblem amiibo for Engage, so that made the experience 10 times cooler. I know I'm getting sentimental and nostalgic, but I honestly don't think I had been more excited for a new game as much as Fire Emblem Engage. As of writing this script, Fire Emblem Engage is about a week away from being 2 years old, and I figured for its second anniversary, I should look back at it and see if this was a good game or not. Before I get started with this review, I want to make something clear. The oldest Fire Emblem game I've played is Awakening, so I'm unfamiliar with anything before that game. It's very well possible that I might complement a feature or mechanic that has existed in a different game. Like I said, I'm unfamiliar with the older Fire Emblem games, so try to keep that in mind. Also keep in mind, I honestly kind of have a soft spot for this game. It's nowhere near perfect, I think we all know that, but I remember really enjoying my first playthrough, so I won't completely rip this game apart. Before I get started, make sure to like and subscribe, I'd really appreciate that. Also, check out the Discord server linked in the description below. I would love to see more people in there. Sorry for the long intro, but with all of that out of the way, let's dive into Fire Emblem Engage. The first thing you'll see when you start the game is the opening theme song, and I have got to be honest here, I am in love with it. I'm fully aware that it's cheesy and dumb, but it just sounds so good. I know pretty much everyone else is of the opinion that it's not that good and unnecessary, but I can't lie, I really like it. Once you start up a new game, you'll be asked to pick between a male or female main character. This shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. Being able to pick the gender of the protagonist is a feature that has existed for a while. Before completely moving on, I do want to comment on their design. I'm, of course, specifically talking about their hair and eye color. It's not that I think it's bad or anything, but it certainly is an interesting design choice. And before anyone says anything, I do remember that there's a lore reason for them looking like this, but I still think it's a little strange. However, I do think it's important to keep in mind that colorful hair is pretty much the standard for any Fire Emblem game, so this really shouldn't feel too crazy. Before I continue on with the review, since I played as male Alear during my playthrough, I'll be using male pronouns. That way no one is confused as to why I keep saying he and him. I also want to let you guys know that I won't be talking about the full story. There are tons of other videos of people talking about the story, so I'll just be pointing out specific parts. And in case if you do want to know the full narrative of Engage, I'll link some videos in the description. One thing that pretty much everyone is aware of is that the plot is like a Saturday morning cartoon. There's cheesy and predictable dialogue, plot twists and foreshadowing that aren't subtle at all, and overall flat and one-dimensional characters. After experiencing the full narrative for myself, pretty much nothing should be taken seriously. Lots of things aren't exactly surprising or revolutionary, and in all honesty, I'm kind of okay with that. In recent times, so many games try to have these massive, complex stories with hidden backstories and lore. It can be a lot to keep up with at times. So anytime the narrative is on the more simple and silly side, I can defend it to a certain extent. That doesn't mean that N-Gage's plot is perfect. I have more than a few issues with it, but honestly, a game's story trying to be a little bit more simple isn't a deal breaker for me. How about I just go over what works and what doesn't? That way you guys have an idea of what I'm talking about specifically. Since this game's story has plenty of flaws, I think it makes the most sense to start off with that. The game starts up with a cutscene that's pretty high quality. We get to see all of the main lords and are introduced to some of the emblems like Marth and Ike. Once the cutscene is over, you are then tasked with defeating an easy boss, and then you move on. While that might sound fine on paper, there's a small issue. This cutscene adds pretty much nothing to the overall game. It's not a flash forward to an upcoming battle since everything shown never happens again, but it's also not a flash back because afterwards Alear wakes up and then goes on to meet all the other characters. It kind of just exists to be a short tutorial and nothing more. I think what they wanted to go for was a nod to Awakening, since that game started out with a flash forward to a battle that takes place later on. At least in Awakening, there's a story reason why that happened. It serves as a plot device, but here in N-Gage, it doesn't really add much of anything to the narrative. Once Alear wakes up after being asleep for over 1,000 years, he is then introduced to his mother Lumera. We once again get another reference to Fire Emblem Awakening, with Alear having no memory of anything at all. A little while later, Lumera tells Alear about the emblems, the rings that allow people to use the power of other Fire Emblem characters. In all honesty, I think the gameplay mechanics and story impacts the emblems have are pretty good, but the emblems existing in the first place leave me with lots of questions. The game never really explains how the emblems work. It just mentions that long ago, Lumera prayed for people's help from other worlds, then the emblem rings came into existence. That makes enough sense, I guess, but that leaves me wondering a few things. How exactly do emblems have characters inside of them? Are they like ghosts or spirits of that person? If they are ghosts, do they know they're dead? Theoretically, if you destroy an emblem ring, do they die? Or could they come back if you just summoned them again? There's so many questions I have about the emblems that the game doesn't really tell you about. None of the other characters ever question it either. They just watch a human being come out of a ring and accept it almost immediately. Later on, we are then shown the infamous Lumera death scene. You might be wondering, why exactly did you call it the infamous death scene? And that's because it lasts for way longer than it really should. Every time you think she's about to pass, she starts talking about something again, which gets kind of annoying after a bit. This is unscripted, I'm just gonna throw this out there real quick. I have 3 minutes of footage of her death scene, and that's not even the full thing. I just randomly stopped at one point because I thought I had enough footage. Like, it keeps going. After learning that an evil dragon guy named Sombron wants all the emblem rings to take over the world, Alear is tasked with exploring the continent to retrieve every other emblem ring before Sombron. For the next few hours, you just go to each kingdom, complete a couple maps, get an emblem ring, go to the next kingdom, complete another couple of maps, wash, rinse, repeat. It gets kinda samey after a while. Around this time is when we are introduced to Vale and the Four Hounds. I think I'm alone when I say this, but I honestly really liked them. Lots of other people said that they were overused, but I honestly didn't mind seeing them all the time. Don't get me wrong, I do miss all the other generals and captains from the other Fire Emblem games, but seeing them all the time made me get a little attached to them. Story-wise, it's kind of lazy, but gameplay-wise, it has its positives. I think fighting any kind of enemy with an emblem ring adds a new layer of strategy. So while Zephyia may be easier to defeat normally, giving her the Lyn emblem forces you to think outside of the box a little bit. It's also around this time when the game starts to flood your army with lots of units. In other Fire Emblem games like Awakening and Fates, you would slowly start to build up your army with stronger units. Then, after a certain point, you had the option to decide which units you wanted to send to battle. However, in N-Gage, nearly every other chapter you're being given new units, and I don't know about anyone else, but it kind of felt a little overwhelming. If you're playing on classic mode and losing lots of units, getting new ones is nice, but on a casual playthrough, it just felt like a little bit too much at once. This also circles around to being an issue for the narrative of the game too. Since you're being given so many new units, they don't have that much time to interact with the story. Once someone joins your army, you're probably never going to see them again unless you watch their supports or use them in battle. This is still an issue for other Fire Emblem games, but I felt like it was much easier to see and engage. Moving forward, there was one part of the game that I thought was a bit of a wasted opportunity that could have been super interesting to see play out. As I'm sure you all know, Alear is a divine dragon, which makes him like a god in this world. I'm not even saying that as a joke or anything. Pretty much every character will kiss the ground you walk on. It's kind of annoying, honestly. Halfway through the game, one of the 4 hounds reveals that Alear is actually the child of Sombron, which should be a huge shock to all of the other characters. However, the issue is solved as soon as it appears. When it's revealed that Alear was actually a fell dragon, Sigurd pops up and says, "Since Lumera was giving you all of her power while you were sleeping, you're actually half divine dragon." Then everyone moves on like nothing happened. I think it would have been really interesting to see the rest of the cast try and wrap their minds around the idea that Alear actually isn't a divine dragon. It would have been intriguing to see how the relationships between everyone changes when they find out that their god is basically a lie. But no, instead of finding a new way to explore these characters, it gets shut down almost immediately just so everyone can continue to worship Alear. If we skip ahead to near the ending, one thing that never really sat right with me was how Alear turns into an emblem. After taking a fatal blow from Sombron, the emblems use their special miracle, which is something they can only do every 1,000 years, to revive Alear by turning him into the 13th Fire Emblem. The whole special miracle doesn't make the most sense to me, but at this point, it's just whatever, why not? But now that Alear is an emblem, I'm left with even more questions. If you destroy his ring, does he die? He's still human, but he can also engage with the other characters, so if someone steals his emblem ring, can he be summoned whenever? Once again, these emblem rings existing just fills my head with so many questions that I would love to see answered. Overall, I think the narrative has some low lows. It's decent at best and downright confusing at worst. Even if they wanted to go for a more simple plot, some of the events just play out weird or go unexplained, which I'm not a huge fan of. Even if I did criticize parts of the story here, there were other moments that I did enjoy. Since the story is pretty simple, it makes it much easier to take a break from it than come back later on. I'm sure we've all played an RPG, not touch it for weeks, then come back and completely forget what's going on. But with Engage, since there's no complex narrative, it's pretty easy to remember what's going on. During my first playthrough, I stopped playing for about a month, but then when I came back, I had no issues remembering where I left off. Some people might not view that as all that important, but I honestly think it's pretty nice. The endgame was easily the best part of the whole game. Alear delivering that cheesy speech about friendship while all the other emblems line up next to him was just too good. I also think this game does a decent job at setting up heartfelt and horrific moments. The scene where Zephyia and Gris died together just kinda tugs at my heartstrings a little. And pretty much any time Sombron mentioned that he only saw his children as tools to get what he wanted and didn't care how many of them died was pretty messed up if you ask me. I also think that one scene where Sombron turned all of your emblems against you did a pretty good job of making you feel hopeless, at least if you ask me. I also loved the entire Solm arc, specifically because of Tamara and Fogado. Not only does Fogado casually forget to mention that he's the Prince of Solm, they also keep the emblem rings stored away in a drawer somewhere in the castle. Honestly, those two characters made the entire Solm arc really enjoyable in my opinion. Speaking of characters, why not start talking about them? All things considered, pretty much every character in this game is defined by 1 or 2 traits, and that's about it. Not every character in a Fire Emblem game needs to be memorable. Fire Emblem Awakening is my favorite game of all time, and I always forget about units like Henry and Rickon, but to me, the cast of Engage was the most forgettable. I couldn't tell you a single thing about units like Linden, Sapphire, or Alfred. What's even worse is that a lot of the supports in this game sadly fall flat. I feel like the interactions between certain characters would be super interesting to see, but they ended up being kind of boring. My mind immediately goes to any of Linden or Clan's supports when I think about missed opportunity. However, there are some really good supports, so it's not a total loss. Fogado and Pandreo's A support is actually super heart-melting, and Marin and Rosado's supports are honestly just really funny. Like I said, not every support in this game is bad, however I did feel like most of them weren't used to their full potential. However, I would like to add real quick off script, there's a lot of supports and characters that can support with each other in this game, which is something that I feel like most other Fire Emblem games don't do. Like, why can't Chrom and Emerin support with each other in Awakening? That's all I'm saying, so N-Gage does a really good job of giving us lots of support, so I appreciate that. I feel like the emblems weren't used to their full potentials either. I really felt like they were just watered down versions of themselves in this game. Not every Fire Emblem lord is super complex, however, I do feel like their personalities were toned down a bit. However, it's a similar situation as the supports. Just because the characters are a bit one note doesn't mean we don't get some good interactions between the characters and emblems.
They say that a good smile is contagious, you know. You should try smiling more often.
Okay, I'll try that sometime.
I can't get over what a privilege it is just to lay eyes on a legendary weapon like Falchion.
Would you believe me if I told you its name actually used to be Pointy Demon Spanker?
I know I talked down about most of the characters, but there are a few that I actually really liked. Tamara and Fogado are easily my favorite characters in this game. I've always gravitated towards the light-hearted comic relief characters, so while they may not be the most complex, I really enjoyed them. I thought Tamara singing all the time was a little cringy at first, but it grew on me later on. I also appreciated how Fogado was able to respect people's boundaries. I don't know why, but in other games I've played recently, the comic relief tries to get under other people's skin and ignore what makes them uncomfortable, so the fact that Fogado knows when to back off most of the time was actually pretty refreshing to see. Similarly to other people, I really liked Yunaka. Like Tamara, she's kind of just a goof nearly all of the time. But what I liked the most was how effectively they were able to explore Yunaka's backstory. In some of her supports, Yunaka describes what it was like being forced to be an assassin and how miserable she was for most of her life. It really makes me wish that other characters had more depth like Yunaka, because I think she's a pretty awesome character. Similarly to Yunaka, Saline also has some moments that explore other parts of her personality. Saline's only goal is to end the war and bring back peace. However, there are some moments in her supports that reveal how dark she can be sometimes. There were a couple times when she said she would have no problem slaughtering as many people as possible to end the war, and honestly, it really shocked me.
I will show no mercy to anyone who causes suffering to the people of Firene, and I will go to any lengths so that my people may enjoy the peace they are accustomed to.
Like I said, a lot of the characters in this game are pretty one-note, but we did get some really good ones too. If I'm being honest, Fogado is probably one of my favorite Fire Emblem characters, so I would imagine other players will have an easy time finding a favorite. Moving away from the characters and the story, I honestly have nothing but good things to say about the combat and gameplay features. Gameplay-wise, Fire Emblem N-Gage is amazing, one of the best in the series if you ask me. Most people know the most important feature in N-Gage are, of course, the emblems. They allow you to use different weapons, learn new skills, and even learn other weapon types so you can reclass. Whenever a character equips an emblem, they'll be able to use that emblem's weapons and skills. That doesn't mean you can use them all the time though. You'll have to engage with an emblem to be able to use those weapons and certain skills. As you fight more and more enemies, you'll be able to unlock new skills and weapons for that character. For example, if you get Emblem Marth to bond level 10 with Alear, Alear will have access to new emblem weapons. The bond levels don't transfer to other units either, so you'll want to make sure you're investing the right emblem with the specific character you want. Every time you engage with an emblem, you'll be able to make use of their special engage skill, and each character has their own unique skill. Celica can teleport and use a powerful magic spell, Sigurd can attack an enemy and then pass through them, things like that. You can only use these skills once per engage though, so you'll have to use them strategically. You also won't be able to stay engaged forever. Once 3 turns pass by, you'll go back to the unit's base form. That doesn't mean that you can't re-engage though. Defeating enemies will charge the engage meter, and standing on special emblem energy tiles will completely refill the meter. These emblems add lots of useful new things to the combat, but they also affect other things like class promotion and skills. Similar to Fire Emblem Three Houses, any units can be any class you want. But to unlock new classes, you have to learn weapon proficiencies from the emblems. So that means, once you reach a certain bond level with an emblem, you'll be able to class change into something that uses swords or axes, or whichever weapons you learned from that emblem. I think this helps players not get too comfortable with using the same emblem on the same character for the whole game. Sure, you could keep the Ike emblem on Tamara for the whole game, but that means other characters can't learn those weapons or skills. Emblems also allow you to inherit 2 of their skills. These can range from simple skills like Vantage or Speed Taker to some really powerful skills like Holdout or Divine Pulse. I actually really liked the reclass system and skills in this game. Whenever I started my second playthrough, I was always thinking about different classes and skills for my units, which is something I don't usually do. Moving on, one of my favorite mechanics in this game is the break mechanic. Whenever you initiate combat with a weapon advantage, it breaks your enemy, which means they won't be able to counterattack until their turn. Whenever I play Fire Emblem, I hardly ever think about the weapon triangle. I have almost no reason to. However, in Engage, giving the player a valid reason to actually memorize and take advantage of it with the break mechanic is honestly genius, and I'd love to see it be a permanent feature in other games. Another cool mechanic is smashing enemies. Whenever you smash an enemy, they'll be moved 1 tile away from you, which opens up some pretty interesting ways to defeat enemies. I won't lie, I hardly ever used it, but you could get lots of use out of it if you really wanted to. Unlike most other Fire Emblem games, weapons have infinite durability. Luckily for us, weapons don't give you any debuffs like they did in Fate, so you don't have to be afraid of silver weapons. There is one problem with this though. During the main campaign, you aren't going to have all that much money. Since weapons never break, I think the devs thought money wouldn't be as important as it is in other games. However, high-level weapons and staves are going to set you back a lot, so I would highly recommend keeping an eye on your financial situation. If we take a step back from the combat, this game has lots of other nice features too. A lot of the maps in Engage are really well designed. Whenever I replay any other Fire Emblem game, there's always a couple maps that I'm not looking forward to. But here in Engage, there's not that many to complain about. I'm not a huge fan of chapters 16 and 24, but other than that, I have no problems with the other maps. Sometimes when I play games like Fate or Three Houses, I feel like there's a certain strategy that I'm missing out on, but Engage's maps feel pretty easy to understand after taking a look at them. I also loved the fact that they brought back older Fire Emblem maps as paralogues in this game. Each emblem has a map that references a part of the story in their game, and it's nice to see these older maps come back. Playing the Corrin and Lucina paralogues just make me wish we could get a Fate and Awakening remaster. I would do almost anything for those. Speaking of paralogues, this game is filled to the brim with them. There's 16 paralogues in the base game, plus 12 more paralogues if you bought the DLC, so there's plenty of maps to play after you finish the main game. Just like the Emblem paralogues, the DLC also has you playing on older Fire Emblem maps. If you haven't bought the DLC already, I would highly recommend it. Not only do you get more paralogues, but you also have access to the Felzino log. Not only does it provide a tough challenge, but it arguably has a better story than the main game, so it's definitely worth your time and money. So overall gameplay and mechanics are really fun in my opinion. There's plenty of ways to customize your units that not many other Fire Emblem games offer, which makes repeat playthroughs more interesting than the last. I do wish you could inherit more than 2 emblem skills, but I think the emblem mechanics themselves are really fun to mess around with. Before I end this video, I want to go over some miscellaneous things I just wanted to mention real quick. One problem many other people had with Engage was its art style. Say whatever you want about me, but honestly, I kind of love it. I understand that it's super inconsistent with the other Fire Emblem games, but you have to admit, it does look really good at times. All the lighting and effects during gameplay and cutscenes are really well done, so I can't bring myself to say anything super negative. I also really loved the combat animations in this game. The way the attacks and dodges flowed together makes combat really fun to watch. I also loved how over the top some of the critical hit animations are, especially for the Swordsmaster class. Engage seemed like with its art style and characters that it was leaning into some anime tropes, so it's kinda funny to see that the combat does this in a way too. Moving on, I really liked everything about the Somniel in Engage. All the plants and bright colors made this place really fun to explore. Not only is the Somniel fun to explore, there's also tons of minigames you can participate in. There's things like exercising, fishing, cooking, wyvern riding, and other cool stuff to do. That one minigame where you polish the emblem rings is pretty boring, but you aren't forced to do that. I liked Garreg Monastery from Three Houses. I think the design and layout was super cool, but sometimes it felt a little too big and confusing. So if Fire Emblem continues to have hub worlds, I would love to see something like the Somniel return. Lastly, I really enjoyed the OST in this game. There are lots of generic sounding themes in this game, but there's also lots of other good music to listen to. There's also lots of remixes of older Fire Emblem themes too, so if none of the new stuff is interesting to you, you can always listen to the remixes. So while not every song in this game is perfect, I think they're orchestrated wonderfully and deserve tons of credit for that alone. Fire Emblem Engage is nowhere near perfect. I won't even try and pretend like it is. The story has its problems, and the characters could definitely use some work. However, I can't pretend like I didn't have a lot of fun the first time I played. We were introduced to some fun new mechanics and got to see some older fan favorite Fire Emblem characters return. So, even if this game isn't the best, I would still highly recommend it to anyone, Fire Emblem fan or not. The Engage mechanic is fun to mess around with, and there's tons of content and replay value in this game. This game may have missed the mark in some areas, but it introduced some interesting new features, so I don't think we need to worry about this series ending anytime soon. So even if this game isn't as great as it could have been, I'll always love it, and think of it as a really fun Fire Emblem game. So the first thing I want to say before I do my typical Yap Sesh, I want to say Happy New Year, Happy 2025. I hope everyone's 2024 went well, and I think we should all look forward to 2025, even if the world kind of sucks right now. I think we should all try and find some positivity in it. So, circling back to the video, one of the first things that I want to know, that I want to get feedback on, is how are we feeling about the lo-fi hip-hop I've been using? Most of the time, whenever I do videos, I just use songs from various different video games. I'll just take bits and pieces from soundtracks. But I thought the lo-fi hip-hop might make the videos feel a little more relaxed, maybe help people feel a little more chill. So I'm just curious what people think about that. Me personally, I really like it. I think I'm gonna keep using it, and I just want to hear your guys' feedback about it. And speaking of the lo-fi, all of the creators, all the videos themselves and their channels will be linked in the description, and I highly recommend you check them out, because I'm gonna be honest, they're just really good songs. I've been listening to them while I read at night. I'm not gonna lie, they're just that good. Lastly, before I wrap up, I'm just curious, what are your guys' thoughts on the more recent videos? I've been trying to do longer, more informative videos, and honestly, I think they're not all that bad, but I'm just curious. Do you guys prefer the more shorter reviews or the more longer ones where I kind of dive deep into everything and talk about stuff for way longer than I usually do? I'm curious. I'd love to know. Real quick before I go, I just want to say happy 2nd anniversary to Fire Emblem Engage. It's, when I'm recording this, it is January 13th, so it's about a week away from Fire Emblem Engage turning 2 years old, so happy anniversary. Also, I know I criticize Engage a lot with the story and the characters and the music, but honestly, I really do love this game. It really means a lot to me. When this game came out, it was just a really, good point in my life, Persona 3 and 4 had the re-releases for every other console, and then N-Gage came out a day later, and a lot of just other good stuff was happening in my life around this point, so I'm very fond of this game. I could never hate it. Anyway, I've been talking for way longer than I should, and I apologize for that. So before everyone goes, make sure to like and subscribe. I'd really appreciate that. If you did it, check out the Discord server in the description below. I hope you all enjoyed the video. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. I love you, and I will see you all later.